Not tonight. Chapter 1. Don't, she said, though he hadn't done anything yet. The word came out calm, practiced, almost kind. He nodded as if they were agreeing on the weather, but something in his face tightened, and she knew she had just named the thing they would spend the rest of the night pretending not to want. They were in her kitchen, which was smaller than he remembered. Or maybe it was the same size and he was larger now, expanded by years, by disappointments that took up space. The overhead light hummed faintly. A kettle sat on the stove, cold. Outside the window, the last of the afternoon slid away without ceremony. He leaned against the counter, careful with his weight, as if the room might notice. I wasn't going to, he said. I know, she replied. She crossed her arms, not defensively, but because the habit had returned. It had been years since she'd needed to hold herself like that. That's the problem. He smiled at that, briefly. It was a reflex, old and unhelpful. The smile had once been enough to move her from one decision to another without noticing the step between. Now it only made things clearer. You always did like to get there before I did. She let that pass. She was listening not for what he said, but for what he might be about to say. There was a difference. Experience had taught her that the second thing mattered more. They had not planned to be alone. This was important, though it no longer excused anything. There had been a reading at the library, the sort that drew a polite crowd and ended with warm white wine poured into plastic cups. Mutual friends. Applause that arrived early and lingered too long. He had asked if she was still nearby. She had said yes. She had said more than yes, though she hadn't realized it at the time. Now here they were, standing in a room that had absorbed her life in small increments. He took it in with a stranger's attention. The blue mug by the sink. The calendar pinned to the wall, still turned to last month. The folded dish towel, squared with care. He saw the way she had arranged things not to invite comment. It looks like you, he said. She raised an eyebrow. You don't know what I look like anymore. I know what you don't let show, he said. He meant it gently. That was almost worse. She turned toward the window, then back again. The light had changed while they weren't watching. The room had tilted toward evening. We should sit, she said, if we're going to talk. He hesitated, then pulled out a chair. He waited for her to choose first. She appreciated that. It was a new courtesy, one he had learned too late to matter before, but not too late to notice now. They sat across from each other at the small table. The space between them felt intentional, negotiated. She placed her hands flat on the surface. He mirrored her without meaning to. You came, he said. You asked. Yes. He paused. I didn't think you would. She nodded. That was fair. I almost didn't. But you did. Yes. They let that rest. The hum of the light filled the pause. Somewhere in the building, water moved through pipes with the sound of breath. I'm married, she said. Not because he had forgotten. Because it needed to be said aloud. So am I, he replied. They both smiled at that, this time without irony. Two people acknowledging a shared, immovable fact. It did not protect them. It did, however, give shape to the room. I don't want to hurt anyone, she said. I know, he said again. She watched him closely. There were lines in his face she did not recognize, but they made sense. They were consistent with the life he had lived without her. That life had been full, she knew. Not happy in the way people imagine happiness, but occupied, useful. There were children, now grown. There was work that had once felt urgent and now felt merely necessary. You look tired, she said. He laughed quietly. So do you? Yes, she said. But I'm used to it. He nodded. That's what worries me. She took a breath, slow and deliberate. We need to be careful. About what? About believing this is something it isn't. And what do you think it is? He asked. She looked down at her hands. They were steady. That surprised her. I think it's unfinished, she said. And unfinished things are dangerous. They pretend to be opportunities. He considered this. He had always been a careful listener when it mattered. That had been part of the trouble. I don't think it's pretending, he said. She looked up. Their eyes met, held. The moment stretched. She felt something in her chest respond before she could stop it. Not hope. Something more specific. Recognition. She stood abruptly. Tea, she said. I'll make tea. He didn't argue. He watched her move around the kitchen, the small choreography of it. The way she filled the kettle, the way she reached for the switch. The familiar domestic sounds returned, grounding and inadequate. Do you remember, he said, how you used to insist on letting the water boil twice? She smiled despite herself. It makes it hotter. That's not how physics works. I know, she said, but it felt right. He nodded. You always trusted what felt right. That's not true, she said. I trusted it once. Then I learned. The kettle clicked off. She poured the water into 2 mismatched cups. She handed one to him, careful not to let their fingers touch. The avoidance was deliberate. He noticed. He always noticed. They returned to the table. I didn't come here to disrupt your life, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Then why did you come? He took a sip of tea, winced slightly at the heat. Because I realized something, he said, and it wouldn't leave me alone. She waited. I realized, he continued, that I've been measuring everything against a moment that never got the chance to fail. She felt the words land, heavy and precise. That's not fair, she said. I know. It makes a myth out of us. Yes. Myths are dangerous, she said. They ask for sacrifices. He smiled faintly. I'm not asking for anything. She laughed, sharp and brief. That's not true. You're asking me to listen. He didn't deny it. They sat in silence again, the tea cooling between them. Outside, a car passed, headlights briefly illuminating the wall. Do you ever think, he asked, about what would have happened if? No, she said quickly. Too quickly. She closed her eyes, then opened them again. I mean, yes. Of course I do. But I don't let myself finish the thought. Why not? Because it doesn't end well, she said. It either ends in disappointment or regret. Sometimes both. He leaned back in his chair. You've always been braver than me, he said. You were willing to choose the disappointment you could see. She studied him. And you weren't. I chose the regret I could postpone, he said. That quieted her. It was too accurate to argue with. They talked then, more easily, about smaller things. About the reading, about mutual acquaintances, about the ways their city had changed without asking permission. The conversation moved like a river around rocks they both pretended weren't there. At some point, she laughed. The sound surprised them both. It had been a long time since laughter had arrived unannounced. There it is, he said softly. What? That sound, he said. I forgot how much it mattered. She felt something tighten again. She stood, carried her cup to the sink. You should go, she said. He didn't move. Is that what you want? Yes, she said. Then, after a pause, no. He stood slowly. He moved toward her, stopping just short of where he could reach her without effort. The space between them felt charged, alive. Don't, she said again, though he still hadn't done anything. He raised his hands slightly, palms open. I won't, he said. Not unless you ask. She met his eyes. The room seemed to hold its breath. And if I don't, she asked. Then I'll leave, he said. And we'll go back to pretending this was a nice evening. She swallowed. The choice pressed in on her, intimate and enormous. She thought of her husband, kind and distant in the way long partnerships sometimes become. She thought of the life she had built, careful and intact. She thought of the cost of undoing even one thread. Stay, she said finally. The word was quiet. It felt irreversible. He exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and fear. He took a step closer. She did not say don't this time. The light flickered overhead, just once, as if warning them. She reached out, then stopped herself, her hand suspended between them. He watched, unmoving. "Not yet," she said. He nodded. He understood restraint. He had lived on it. They stood there, close enough to feel each other's presence, far enough to pretend it was still a decision. Outside, night settled fully, sealing the window into a dark mirror that reflected them back to themselves. Older, quieter, and on the brink of something they would have to answer for. She lowered her hand. The moment stretched, held, and neither of them moved. Chapter 2. He did not stay the way she had meant it. At first, staying meant standing there, both of them suspended in the space she had carved with a single word. The kitchen seemed to recede, its ordinary edges losing authority. The light steadied. The kettle cooled completely. Time resumed, but at a different speed, as if they had stepped off the main road without noticing. He lowered his hands. She let hers fall to her sides. The relief of not touching was immediate and sharp, followed closely by something else, an ache, familiar and unwelcome. "I should sit," he said. She nodded, though she wasn't sure that was true. Sitting would make this longer. Standing allowed for escape. They returned to the table, but the symmetry was gone. He chose a different chair, one angled slightly toward her. She noticed. She always noticed. "This feels reckless," she said. "Yes," he replied. He did not soften it. "That's not a compliment." "I know." She studied him. The years had done something to his certainty. It had thinned it, made it more selective. When he agreed now, it meant something. "You don't seem sorry," she said. "I'm not," he said. Then, after a pause, "I'm careful." She laughed quietly. "That's new." "So is the cost," he said. That landed. She picked up her cup, though it was empty now, and held it between her palms. The ceramic was cool. She let that ground her. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked him. He considered the question, not as a challenge, but as an invitation. "I think," he said slowly, "that I'm finally letting myself be honest about something I've been editing for decades." She shook her head. "That's not honesty. That's revision." He smiled faintly. "You always did have a ruthless relationship with language." "Someone had to," she said. "You were always too generous with your own intentions." He leaned back. "You make it sound like I came here with a plan." "You came here with a feeling," she said. "That's worse." He didn't argue. He looked around the kitchen again, this time with less distance. "You've made a life," he said. "Yes." "A good one." She hesitated. "A decent one." He heard the difference. "Is that how you describe it now?" "It depends on the day," she said. "On the quiet days, it's good. On the loud ones, it's managed." He nodded. "That sounds familiar." They were quiet again. The silence did not feel heavy now. It felt provisional, as if it were waiting to see what they would do with it. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after all this time?" He looked at her, really looked. "Because now I know what I'm risking," he said. "And I'm still here." She absorbed that. It was not romantic. It was worse. It was deliberate. "You didn't answer the question," she said. "I did," he said gently. "Just not the way you wanted." She stood and went to the sink, rinsed the cups, set them in the rack. The domesticity of it steadied her again, though she knew better than to trust that feeling. "Do you remember," she said, not turning around, "the night we decided not to be terrible people?" He smiled at the memory, though it tightened his throat. "You ordered that for both of us." "Someone had to," she said. "You were ready to romanticize our own irresponsibility." "I still might," he said. She turned to face him. "That's what scares me." He rose slowly, stopping a few feet away. "You think I'm here to undo you," he said. "I think you're here to remind me of who I was before I learned how to be careful," she said. "And I don't know if that version of me is survivable anymore." He took that in. "You weren't careless," he said. "You were brave." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Those two get confused all the time," she said. especially by men. He did not flinch. Then let me say it differently, he said. You were honest. You wanted things and said so. You didn't shrink to make them easier to carry. She felt the words hit something tender. That woman doesn't live here anymore, she said. I don't believe that, he said. I think she's been quiet. Silence again, the kind that presses in. She walked past him into the living room. He followed, but did not crowd her. The room was dimmer, softer. Books lined the walls, their spines worn. A lamp glowed in the corner, casting a circle of light that did not quite reach the edges. She sat on the sofa. He remained standing for a moment, then sat at the far end, leaving space between them. The restraint felt almost ceremonial. I don't want this to become a story we tell ourselves later, she said. Something we polish until it gleams and forget the damage underneath. I don't either, he said. That's why I'm still sitting over here. She smiled despite herself. You're very good at this version of yourself. I've had practice, he said, mostly in other people's lives. That surprised her. What do you mean? I mean, he said carefully, that I've spent a long time being adjacent to what I want. Close enough to feel it. Far enough to pretend it wasn't costing me anything. She looked at him. Really looked. The steadiness, the restraint, it was not a virtue. It was a strategy. And strategies always exacted their own price. Does your wife know this version of you? She asked. He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. She knows the shape of it, he said. Not the source. That's not nothing, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. They sat like that for a while, two people measuring the weight of what was not being said. Outside, the city settled into its night sounds, distant traffic, a siren somewhere far away, the murmur of lives continuing unbothered. I should leave, he said finally. Her chest tightened. You said that already. I know, he said. I mean it differently now. She nodded. Yes, she said. You should. He stood. This time, the movement felt final. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. If I go, he said, we can still pretend this was a coincidence. She crossed the room and stood a few feet behind him. And if you don't, then we'll have to be precise, he said. About everything. She considered that. Precision had always appealed to her. It was the bluntness she feared. Turn around, she said. He did. They stood facing each other, closer now. Close enough that she could see the pulse at his throat, steady but insistent. Close enough that the years fell away without permission. This is the part, she said, where people usually make promises they can't keep. I'm not going to promise anything, he said. I'm going to ask. She raised an eyebrow. That's not better. It is for me, he said. What are you asking? Permission, he said. To be honest with you. And only you. Her breath caught. That's a terrible idea. Yes, he said. But it's a clean one. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she saw her life clearly. Its compromises, its quiet satisfactions, its careful omissions. She saw the version of herself he was naming, still there, still breathing. One conversation, she said. At a time. He nodded. That's all I'm asking. She stepped closer. The space between them disappeared without ceremony. She reached up, touched his sleeve, not his skin. The contact was deliberate, restrained. Don't make me smaller than I am, she said. I wouldn't dare, he said. And don't ask me to be more than I can afford, she added. He swallowed. I won't. She lowered her hand. The moment held, taut and quiet. Go, she said. He hesitated, then nodded. He opened the door, stepped out into the hall. Before he left, he looked back at her. This isn't finished, he said. She did not answer. She watched as the door closed between them, the soft click echoing through the apartment. She stood there for a long time afterward, listening to the silence settle back into place. It was different now, marked. A pause, not an ending. On the table, Her phone lit up. A message from her husband, asking if she was home yet. She did not answer right away. And in that delay, she felt the shape of what was coming begin to take form. Chapter 3. She did not answer the message until she had washed her hands. It was a small ritual, learned over years of returning to herself after moments that felt uncontainable. Warm water. Soap worked carefully into the spaces between fingers. A pause while the water ran clear. Only then did she dry her hands and pick up the phone. Yes. Long evening. I'm home. The words were accurate enough to pass inspection. She set the phone face down on the counter and leaned against it, letting the cool laminate press into her spine. The apartment had returned to its familiar quiet, but it no longer felt neutral. It felt observant. She slept poorly. That surprised her less than the fact that she had expected to sleep poorly. Anticipation, she realized, had already begun to do its work. It was arranging her body ahead of her consent. In the early hours, she lay awake and listened to her husband breathe. The sound had once felt anchoring. Now it felt procedural, like the ticking of a clock you notice only when it stops meaning anything. She did not think of the other man by name. She thought of him by posture, by restraint, by the way he had waited for her to choose first. Morning arrived without drama, light through the blinds, the soft negotiation of routine. Coffee poured, toast burned slightly, as it often did now. Her husband kissed her cheek on his way out the door, his mouth warm and absent. Busy today, he asked. Yes, she said. It was true. She had made it so. She waited an hour after he left before doing anything that could be interpreted as a decision. Then she sat at the small desk by the window and opened her laptop. The screen glowed. Her email inbox loaded slowly, as if offering her time to reconsider. She did not have to search for his name. It was already there. Last night stayed with me, the message began. No greeting, no apology, just an assertion. She closed the laptop. She stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the street. A woman walked a dog that pulled impatiently at its leash. A man waited for a bus, his shoulders hunched against nothing in particular. The world was continuing at a pace that did not account for her internal delay. When she sat again, she opened the message fully. I don't want to intrude, it continued. I just wanted you to know that I meant what I said. About precision. She read it twice. The word sat there, loaded. Precision. As if they were surgeons, not two people circling a wound. She typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. What she finally sent was brief. If we're going to do this, she wrote, we have to agree on what this is. The reply came faster than she expected. Coffee, he wrote. Public. Limited. Honest. She stared at the screen. Coffee was a boundary disguised as a gesture. Public was protection. Limited was a promise no one could keep. Honest was the most dangerous word of all. Tomorrow, she wrote. Midday. She closed the laptop before doubt could revise her. They met at a cafe neither of them had ever mentioned before. It was neutral territory, too far from her apartment to feel like an extension of it, too anonymous to belong to him. The windows were large, the tables small. The air smelled faintly of burnt milk and citrus cleaner. He was already there when she arrived, seated at a table near the back. He stood when he saw her, then checked himself, sitting back down with an embarrassed smile. Sorry, he said. Old habits. She smiled. Some habits are allowed. They ordered coffee they did not need. When they sat, the table between them felt both intimate and absurdly insufficient. You look well, he said. You look like you've been thinking, she replied. He nodded. So do you. They let that settle. This isn't a date, she said. No, he agreed. It's a conversation, and it ends when we say it does. Yes. She leaned back, assessing him. He seemed calmer than the night before, less charged. That worried her. Calm suggested commitment. You asked for honesty, she said. Here's mine. I don't trust the part of myself that wants this. He listened without interrupting. I don't trust what it makes me capable of, she continued. I don't trust that it won't ask for more than I can give without breaking something I don't want broken. He considered that. Do you trust me? He asked. She laughed softly. That's the wrong question. What's the right one? Do I trust you not to turn this into something I have to grieve? She said. He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was steady. I can't promise that, he said. I can promise not to lie about where it's going. That might be worse, she said. Usually, he agreed. They drank their coffee. It tasted thin. I've been careful my whole life, she said. Careful choices. Careful words. I married a man who knows how to live inside the margins. And are you happy? He asked. She met his eyes. I'm intact. He nodded. That's an achievement. It shouldn't be the only one, she said. He watched her closely. You don't want to be rescued. No, she said. I want to be seen, without being required to change. I see you, he said, and I don't want to change you. She held his gaze. That's what everyone says at the beginning. This isn't the beginning, he said quietly. It's the middle. We're just admitting it. That landed with uncomfortable accuracy. They talked for an hour, then another, about work, about aging parents, about the way desire changed shape with time, becoming less urgent and more precise. He told her about a night, years earlier, when he had woken beside his wife and felt an unfamiliar grief, not for what he had lost, but for what he had never allowed himself to want. She did not tell him about the nights she lay awake beside her husband, feeling a similar grief and dismissing it as ingratitude. Some truths needed to be staggered. When they stood to leave, the cafe felt suddenly too small. He hesitated, then reached out, not to touch her, but to open the door. Next time, he said, we'll need a longer table. She paused. There doesn't have to be a next time. He smiled, not indulgent, not hopeful, just patient. I know. Outside, the afternoon had turned bright. The city looked newly washed. They stood on the sidewalk, momentarily unsure of their orientation. Walk with me, he said. She shook her head. Not today. He accepted that. Then I'll see you when I see you. She nodded. Be careful. So should you, he replied. She watched him walk away, his stride unhurried, his shoulders relaxed. A man who had decided something and was willing to let it take time. She turned in the opposite direction and began the walk home. With each step, she felt the careful life she had built shift slightly, as if accommodating a new weight. Her phone vibrated in her bag. A message from her husband. Dinner tonight? I'll be late. She slowed, then stopped altogether. The sidewalk moved around her, indifferent. She typed a reply, erased it, typed again. And before she could decide which version of herself would answer, the phone vibrated once more, this time with a message from the man walking away. Thank you for the honesty. It changes things. She stood there, the two messages waiting, each asking her to speak into a different future. And for the first time in years, she did not know which voice would come out when she finally answered. Chapter 4. She answered neither message until she reached the bridge. It was a habit she had developed over years of deferring decisions. Walk until the city reorganized itself around her thoughts. The river below was low and slow, its surface broken by light. She stopped midway, resting her hands on the cold rail, and let the noise of traffic pass through her without meaning. She answered her husband first. Yes, I'll be home. The message felt heavier than it should have. Not because it was a lie, but because it wasn't. She was always home. That had become the point. She waited longer before answering the other. It changes things, she typed, then erased it. She tried again. Honesty isn't neutral, she wrote. It doesn't just clarify. It commits. The response came a minute later. I know. That was all. No pressure. No elaboration. The restraint unsettled her more than any insistence would have. Dinner was quiet. Her husband talked about work, an upcoming deadline, a colleague's irritation, a minor victory that had already begun to dull. She listened, nodded in the appropriate places, asked questions she knew the answers to. She watched his face as he spoke, the familiar geography of it, and felt an unexpected tenderness. This, too, she thought, was love, or at least a version of it that had earned its place. Afterward, they watched television without watching it. She rested her head against his shoulder. His arms settled around her automatically, the weight of it reassuring, undemanding. She let herself breathe in the steadiness of him. Later, in bed, he fell asleep quickly. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the small sounds of the building, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant elevator, the city keeping its promises to no one in particular. She thought of the word precision again, how it had been offered like a gift, how gifts always implied obligation. The next few days passed without incident. Emails were exchanged, but sparingly. Observations rather than confessions. A line about weather. A question about a book she had once recommended. He did not ask to see her again. She did not suggest it. The restraint held, until it didn't. The invitation came on a Thursday afternoon, slipped into her inbox between a meeting reminder and a grocery list she had emailed herself. A reading, he wrote. Small. A friend. No obligation. She read it twice. The phrase no obligation was a courtesy, not a truth. She closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. Outside, rain had begun without her noticing, the kind that erased edges rather than announcing itself. She told herself she would decide later. Later arrived faster than expected. Yes, she wrote. The reading was held in a narrow room above a bookstore, its windows fogged from the press of bodies. Folding chairs filled quickly. The air smelled of damp coats and paper. She found him standing near the back, his expression alert, watchful. He did not approach her. That mattered. They listened to the reading in companionable silence, their attention aligned but separate. She was aware of him in the way one becomes aware of a second heartbeat nearby, steady, insistent, impossible to ignore once noticed. Afterward, people clustered, talking too loudly, performing appreciation. Someone handed her a glass of wine. She took it without drinking. He came to stand beside her, not close enough to touch. "I'm glad you came," he said. "So am I," she replied, and meant it. They spoke to others, never too long alone. When they were, the conversation stayed anchored to the room. The author, the passage everyone pretended to understand, the unreliable microphone. When the crowd thinned, they found themselves by the stairs. "I can walk you," he said. She hesitated. Part of the way. Outside, the rain had softened. The streetlights blurred, halos forming and dissolving. They walked side by side, their steps unconsciously matched. "This is how it happens," she said. "Not in the moments we fear, in the ordinary ones." He nodded. "That's when people stop guarding themselves." She stopped walking. He stopped too. "Say what you want," she said, out loud. Now. He looked at her for a long moment. The city moved around them, indifferent. "I want to keep seeing you," he said. "Not to escape anything, not to fix anything, just to be present with you, as carefully as possible." She closed her eyes. The simplicity of it was devastating. "And if that stops being possible?" she asked. "Then we stop," he said, "before we pretend otherwise." She studied him. There was no urgency in his face. No plea, just intention. She thought of her husband, asleep beside her most nights, of the life they had assembled piece by piece, of the cost of disruption. She also thought of the quiet ache that had accompanied her for years, unnamed until now. "Not tonight," she said. He nodded. "Not tonight." They resumed walking. At the corner where they would part, he paused. "May I?" he asked, gesturing vaguely, as if even the idea of touch required consent. She considered, then nodded once. He kissed her cheek. The contact was brief, almost formal, but it landed with unexpected force, sending a ripple through her that felt both welcome and alarming. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she replied. She watched him disappear down the block before turning toward home. That night, lying beside her husband, she did not sleep at all. In the dark, her phone vibrated softly on the nightstand. A message. "I meant what I said," it read. "About stopping if we need to." She stared at the screen, the words glowing like a quiet challenge. And in the space between her breathing and his, she realized something had already begun, something that would not be undone by restraint alone. She turned the phone face down, but she did not delete the message. Final chapter. The phrase returned to her without warning. She was standing in the kitchen, years later, waiting for water to boil. The apartment had changed addresses, but not proportions. The light hummed the same way. Her hands, steady now, rested on the counter as if they belonged there. Not tonight. The words arrived without urgency, without fear. They were no longer a shield. She let the water boil once this time. It was enough. They had learned, eventually, how to stop. Not dramatically, not with declarations or clean endings. They stopped the way people with lived lives tend to, by noticing when the cost began to outweigh the truth it once justified. There had been dinners, walks, a handful of rooms borrowed from the edges of other people's lives. Conversations so careful they sometimes mistook themselves for virtue. Touches that arrived late and left early. Desire reshaped into something quieter, something that asked permission each time it entered the room. They never lied to each other. That was their rule, the one indulgence they allowed themselves. It was also the thing that made continuation impossible. Honesty, they learned, is not a foundation. It is a solvent. It dissolved the fantasies first, then the arguments they might have had if they were younger, then the illusion that love, simply by arriving late, must therefore be truer. What remained was something harder to name. Affection stripped of ambition. Desire without entitlement. A deep, steady recognition that did not demand possession. And then, eventually, choice. She was the one who said it aloud, though by then it had already been decided. They were sitting across from each other, as they so often did, hands wrapped around cups they no longer finished. The table between them felt familiar now, not charged. Earned. "This isn't ending because it failed," she said. He nodded. His face had changed again in those years, softer in places, sharper in others. Time had not been unkind to him, but it had been exact. "It's ending because it worked," he said. "Yes," she replied, "and because it can't work twice." He smiled at that, not sadly, not bravely, just honestly. They did not touch when they stood. They did not need to. What had passed between them had already settled into the body, into memory, into language. "Not tonight," she said then, the words familiar even as they changed shape. And this time, they meant, not anymore. Her husband died in early spring. It was not sudden, but it was still too fast. There are always conversations left unfinished, even in the longest marriages. That, she learned, is not a failure. It is the shape of shared time. She grieved him cleanly, fully, with the respect owed to a life lived alongside another without spectacle. She did not confuse absence with permission. The other man came to the funeral. He stood at the back, as he always had. He did not approach her. She was grateful. Later, there was a message. Brief. Exact. "I'm here if you want to talk." She did not answer that night. Not because she was afraid. Because she finally understood what the words required. They met months later, by accident or design. It no longer mattered which. A museum cafe. A shared table. the mild shock of recognition settling into something almost domestic. They were older now in a way that felt earned rather than imposed. The urgency had burned itself out, leaving clarity in its place. They spoke easily, kindly, without circling. "You could," he said, not as a suggestion but as an acknowledgement. "If you wanted to." She smiled. "I know. And you don't." "No," she said. "I don't." There was no disappointment in his face, only relief, perhaps mirrored. They had already lived the story other people imagine. It had simply taken place where no one could see it. Outside, evening arrived without ceremony. When they stood to leave, he hesitated, then asked, "May I?" She nodded. This time, the kiss was on the mouth. Brief, complete, entirely sufficient. "Good night," he said. She held his gaze, felt the absence of ache, the quiet presence of choice. "Not tonight," she said. And now the words meant something else entirely. Not delay, not denial, not fear. They meant, "I have already chosen my life." She walked home alone, unafraid of the quiet waiting there. For the first time, the silence did not ask for anything more.